Can I talk about how Jesus did not fulfill any of the messianic prophecies? Yes. But first, Kitty. Now that that's out of the way, if you grew up the way that I did, you were told that Jesus fulfilled some 3,000 prophecies in the Old Testament. The problem is, there isn't really much written about the Messiah in the Hebrew Bible. Now, there's a whole lot more written about the Messianic age that the Messiah is supposed to reign during, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But everything you need to know about the Messiah specifically can be found in the first 4 verses in Isaiah chapter 11. He will be from the tribe of David, he will have the spirit of knowledge, wisdom, he will fear the Lord, etc. He will judge the poor, strike the earth, which basically means declare war, and he will slay the wicked. That's pretty much it. Now, those few details are echoed in a number of other verses, including Ezekiel chapter 37. This is where we get a full timeline of the Messianic age and the coming of God's kingdom. Now, it takes up that entire chapter, so I won't go through all of it. But this is the key starting in verse 24. My servant David will be king over them. They will live in the land of their fathers. I will place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary, which is the rebuilding of the third temple, in their midst forever, forever, forever. See, the thing about the Messiah is he was never prophesied to be God in the flesh, born of a virgin, forgive sins, perform healings, miracles, or die and be resurrected. So what the New Testament authors did is they manipulated certain passages to make it seem like Jesus did fulfill prophecy. Now, to be fair, this was not an uncommon practice in ancient literature, and I think they genuinely believed that Jesus was the Messiah, and they were trying to reconcile that, so I don't think they did it maliciously. But I could be wrong. It's really hard to know the author's intent and motive. But in any case, now in order to do this, one of the first things the biblical authors had to do was to tie Jesus' bloodline to that of David. The authors of Matthew and Luke do this by deploying a genealogy. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over the whole virgin birth thing because the genealogies themselves have their own problems. Now, starting in Matthew, pay attention to this name right here, because this man was cursed by God to be childless in Jeremiah chapter 22. Write this man down as childless so that none of his descendants will ever sit on the throne of David. Yeah, that's a pretty big oops. For anyone who doesn't know, the genealogies between Matthew and Luke are very different. What apologists typically do to explain this away is to say that Luke is actually using Mary's genealogy and not Joseph's. Problem is, Mary was a member of the tribe of Levi, which is a descendant of Aaron, not David, the king of Judah. We know this because of Luke 1 verse 5. Feel free to pause and read, and note the name Elizabeth. Elizabeth was the mother of John the Baptist, and she is also Mary's cousin. All that to say, Mary's from the wrong tribe. Another thing they had to do to make it seem like Jesus was the Messiah was to misquote the Hebrew Bible entirely. There are a lot of examples of this, but here's just one from Paul. In Romans 10, Paul says Christ is the end of the law, and to justify this, he quotes Deuteronomy 30:14. The word is near you, and in your mouth and in your heart. But if you actually go and look at Deuteronomy 30:14, you'll see that he's leaving out something pretty important. But the word is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may observe it. It was never prophesied that the Messiah would do away with Jewish law. Even Jesus, who was a practicing Jew who took on Jewish disciples and taught them how to follow his interpretation of the Mosaic law, understood this. Matthew chapter 4, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. Now, to be fair, Paul and many of the other early Christians believed that Jesus' death and resurrection was that accomplishment, but the point remains that that is not what is taught in the Hebrew Bible. Now, here's one more example before I wrap this up. Probably the most cited passage when trying to claim that Jesus fulfilled prophecy in the Hebrew Bible comes from the narrative of the suffering servant in Isaiah 53. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. By his stripes we are healed, like a lamb led to the slaughter. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, saying, My servant will justify the many, as he will bear their iniquities, and he poured out himself unto death. Sounds pretty convincing. Aside from the fact that there's still no mention of a resurrection, you may have noticed how most of this is past tense. The suffering of this servant is not a prediction of the future, it's a reflection of the past. So then, who is this servant? Well, if you read any of the chapters before and after these passages, you'll see it's pretty explicit that the suffering servant is a personification of the entire nation of Israel. Behold chapter 49, my servant Israel. 48, his servant Jacob. 45, Jacob my servant and Israel my chosen one. There are plenty more, but I think 3 examples is enough. But if you want to insist that this is talking about Jesus, keep that same energy when you go to the next chapter, where the servant is now being called a barren widow who may have been a prostitute. Remember that numbering the chapters and verses came much later. These passages are all talking about the same thing. And the historical context here is the Israelites were kicked out of their homeland by the Persians and were in exile. They thought that God was punishing them now, but was going to redeem and prosper them later. So yeah, bit of a long one. Thanks for everyone who stuck around. And feel free to hit me up with any follow-up questions.
That was an excellent breakdown. And before anybody says it, Jesus did not fulfill any of those prophecies, and this is one of the reasons why the Jewish community back then and the Jewish community today do not accept this Jesus as the Messiah based on the Jewish Bible, because he did not fulfill the requirements of becoming that Messiah. He did not upend the Roman Empire and establish a kingdom and punish the wicked and all those sorts of things, which is what their Messiah was supposed to do, is to conquer, is to be a ruler, is to usher in Israel as a conquering nation, a ruling nation, not this ethereal kingdom to which Christians have manifested the iconography, the character of Jesus into today. And before anybody says it, your Jesus character is not prophesied in Isaiah as far as the virgin birth. When you actually look at that prophecy, it's not really a prophecy. It's a what's happening right then kind of moment. The original text of that one says that a young girl, a young maiden, has conceived. It's not saying will conceive. That was later changed in order for it to fit into your Jesus narrative. So go do the research and look at the older versions of the Torah, and you'll see that it says that a young maiden has conceived, which is most likely is talking about one of the persons who were involved during the Babylonian / Persian captivity. So it's not talking about your Jesus character. This is also why people like myself who are not Jewish, we reject this idea of Jesus as being the Son of God or is God if we were to take it based on this book. And we just reject it in itself because it has absolutely nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with my family, my heritage. There's no reason for me to worship this God. This will be like me worshiping Quetzalcoatl or Maui or some other deity from some other culture that I have no connections with whatsoever. And none of them are provable anyway. But I love that guy's video. I think you guys should go watch his video a couple more times. It's a great video. Y'all have a great day. And remember, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.